but we have to work within the financial means, you know,
Right.
that we have to work with.
But when I do look at the cuts that you have,
Yeah.
most of the cuts are the things that you added on 2009 with the stimulus money.
Nope,
No.
No, we didn't add anything.
nope.
The 7th grade English, Spanish, language arts
No,
thing.
we always had
The-
They've always had an exploratory program at the middle school.
The issue that
My
we
son's in
have,
9th grade, he had it 2 years.
Yeah.
the issue that we have sometimes is
Seen it,
people
yeah.
think that we're adding, like, we might have actually moved it onto the school budget and we took it out of
From a
school
re-
choice.
from revolving
or
accounts.
a revolving account, but those aren't sustainable anymore. Because I had this question to Terry a
Yeah.
while ago when we started looking through the budget, because it looked like the FTEs were going up, when onto the school budget they in fact were. But when you look at choice, you would see the headcount being reduced, as well as the other revolving accounts that we have.
Actually, not one of these positions, Joy, was not a position we had in 2009.
Good
There was
example.
one change that you made.
The only change we made was we had a technology teacher at the Pembroke, and that position had always been staffed by an aide. And when we hired Mary Ann, she was getting her degree in instructional technology. So what we did is we made her a teacher because she had the certification and she earned it. So we just moved her from a tutor salary to a full teacher salary. But other than that, every position existed prior to that.
Okay.
Maybe.
My other one question is to, I saw that you advertised for a secretary for Mrs. Zinabelli.
I advertised for a clerk typist. Yes, I did.
Right, but
And
I
we're
mean,
doing
if
that
you-
out of a
if-
grant.
I,
That's out of a grant.
okay, that's my question,
Okay.
was where you getting the
I
money?
knew you'd
mean,
ask me that.
right, I mean, it's like, how can you complain about
We
all
have-
this money and then
we
you're
have a fr-
asking, you're
listen,
hiring
can I
people at the
just
same
explain? We
time?
have frozen our budget since October. The only spending has been essential. We have had, what does it have our maintenance cost been that we had not budgeted for just this year
Well,
alone?
well over
$100,000.
Well over $100,000. Now, that doesn't mean we have $100,000 of fat in our budget. It means that we didn't do $100,000 of things
And
that
that
we had
doesn't count the
budgeted to
roof.
do.
Yeah, that's
That,
exclusive.
that
of the
doesn't
roof.
count the roof
That
and
does
the
not
snow
count the
removal.
roof.
That's heaters, coils.
You know, and
Ventilators.
I'm always
Breaking.
glad to go through any line in the budget with anybody. We're very happy to have anybody come in. It's not exactly riveting, exciting stuff, but it would be, you know, it's educational if you have questions like that. Yeah, that I have a grant for. And
But how did you get a grant so fast? Like, if you can get a grant that fast over like
no,
in
it's
3
a grant.
weeks?
It's a grant we hadn't applied
Can't we
for.
get something else with the grant money? Like, do
Let me
we
tell-
have then a clerk?
Let me tell you the thing about no.
She doesn't have any help up there.
The grants.
But she signed up for that. But
Well,
that's how she took her
again-
job at the beginning of the year. I mean, it's not that,
Well, yeah.
it's,
Okay.
it's March. Like, we have no money. You're saying we
Right.
have no money. You're asking us for,
Right.
but then you're gonna hire someone a clerk typist. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well-
Even if you're paying her $10, you're telling us we have no money.
And I understand
No,
that, but it does make sense to the people who are making that decision, I guess. And if they need to explain it to you, I'm
Well,
sure that
then
they
I
can.
think that the community needs to know that too, that they can just come find money when they
Well,
need to.
No, I think.
Because you could probably ask a parent to go up there and file and answer the phone and volunteer.
Yeah, we've been down that road.
Yeah, there's confidentiality issues with that, you know, parents contacting the school, you know, it's small town, you know, access to student records, you know, we just need to make sure that what we're doing is as confidential as possible. And just so you know, there was a particular grant that Mr. Dempsey hadn't applied for yet. We found out that, you know, we were eligible for it. And we're funding a portion of a special ed secretary, which freed up the money that was being used currently in the budget. The reason for that, adding that position, quite honestly, is Mrs. I get phone calls daily from people, Mrs. Yanabelli can't get back to me, I can't get this, I can't get that, my kid doesn't have this, I called the secretary downstairs, bring my kids lunch, nobody got back to me, and I think it's a customer service problem, and we have a responsibility to our customers. We also have students who can't get their needs met because there's nobody in the office to greet them when they, you know, have to be there because Mrs. Yanabelli, and you're right, she signed up for that, and we did it based on what we thought was best, but you know, at the point at which we realized that there's a lot of things that aren't going well with that, we had the opportunity to use this grant funds to see whether it's going to be useful from April to June, and we'll see where it goes from there. But, you know, there were really strategic reasons to do it. We found out a lot this year, and, you know, we want to make sure that, believe me, we're not looking at this as we can just find the money. We strategically, we had the opportunity. I would have done it sooner if I knew I had the opportunity to do it sooner. I didn't have the opportunity to do it sooner. So we're going to make the best of it for the rest of the year, and hopefully the parents and the students are going to be well served by the decision to add that position. We really should have a secretary in each school. And when you look at industry standards, right, you say, well, what would be, so if I say one secretary for every 300 students, and then I go and look at what we've got, the middle school should have a secretary.
And how many are at the Pembroke? I think there's like 8.
540.
Right.
So,
No, but how
so
many
they have,
secretaries
So well,
behind that
I'm not
desk?
saying we have what we need,
Right.
right? So we have one, and we have a part-time special education secretary who's there, to handle that aspect of the job. But that's, I think when we talk about budgets, Joy, and we try to say, well, for the community's sake, what's the most fair way to do it? How do we make these decisions? We don't just
Right.
sort of say, oh, well, I like Terry, so I'm going to make sure I create a job for him. What we do is we start to say, well, okay, industry standards for for custodians, right? How many, how many square foot is a school, and how many custodians, level 3 cleanliness, not white glove, but I walk in, I say, this place is clean, right? And then we realize, we kind of look at ours and say, oh man, 10 years ago there were 12 people working in custodial maintenance on the grounds, and now there are 7. Okay, so we're below industry standards in all of our schools now, based on the fact that we've cut and
We've
reduced
kept
the
cutting.
last 3 years so that we could protect the classroom jobs. The reason we're here is that we've done, we've kind of taken every one of those categories that is not direct instruction for students, and we've already reduced them to look below what really is industry standards, or what I think any of us would say is acceptable. So those are the way, we do make the decisions strategically that way. And in the case of the secretary, we took a risk this year. We said, well, let's give it a shot. It was more important to have a principal there. But in order for the principal to be able to do her job and serve the public, parents, students, faculty, for 380 students, we found that there does need to be a body there to fill that gap. That's why we're doing what we're doing.
Okay.
Thank you, Joy.
Oh, you're welcome.
Are there any other questions on the budget? Because I have to close this meeting, so I'll take one more.
Margaret Petorsky, Hardy Terrace. Last week's meeting, I believe you talked about having a prep meeting with the accreditation committee or a review. And several of the cuts that have been mentioned in the newspaper and in the 2 sort of workshop sessions really focused on the potential impact to accreditation.
That's right.
So I wondered if you could update us on where that accreditation meeting led you. Sorry.
The accreditation people came on Tuesday.
Tuesday, and actually Anne and me
Right.
and Mr. Lucia, the principal of the high school, met with Janet Allison, who's the director of NEASC. So she's not one of the commissioners that makes the final decisions, but she's the director. So she's a pretty important person
Absolutely.
in NEASC. And we actually met with her and told her kind of where we are in the situation with the community and just the questions that have been asked about accreditation, and going over the report and tried to figure out, what kinds of things could we do, and where were we in danger of downgrading the accreditation. So we had a very nice conversation with her, and actually, the end of that conversation, she agreed, if we could get a date, it's always a question of when we can all get together, but she agreed to come out and actually talk to the community about accreditation, answer questions that people might have, and I think that was very gracious of her. So we're just trying to figure out how that can work best.
And do you think that it's possible that that date could be scheduled before any type of town meeting
Well,
or
that's what we're
potential
trying.
warrant?
That's what we're trying to do. Her flexibility is a little bit better in April than it is in March, but we're trying to shoot for sometime in March. And what she basically said was there are really 2 huge components of the warning status. One is the building, and the other is the long-range financial commitment to be able to fund the programs at the school that they feel meet the standards. And these are objective standards. These aren't our standards.
No,
they're not arbitrary. They're well defined. And she basically said that it's going to be difficult to get off warning until something is resolved with the Pembroke school. If the vote goes down next year, well, that's not going to be a good thing, in her opinion. But she's a little reluctant to make commitments, that would definitely downgrade, or, but she said that the building the building vote, she was very encouraged by the town's support for the feasibility study. They really considered that to be great, and it was a real reasonable progress. She thought that really showed reasonable progress. They were very, very happy about that. They, clearly she's concerned about the cuts, potentially, and very concerned about the fees, because in their opinion, and I think we'd all agree, that co-curricular activities are also along with academics, are a very important part of a child's education, a well-rounded education. And the fact that the fees they have impacted, but they will impact more greatly.
Yes.
The ability for children to participate, it's an equity issue in many ways. So those are areas that she was concerned about. But she said, why don't we educate the community if you want, and let's wait and see until decisions are made on the budget to see what, if any, cuts have to be made, or if there's some other discussion about funding to be able to avoid these cuts. And then from there, we'll have to figure out, what happens. Mr. Lucia has to file a report with NIASC every time there's a change in the, what do you call it, Peter? Substantive change. And then the commissioners take into consideration all of that at their meetings, and then they let us know what we need to take for next steps.
Because how many years has Georgetown been on warning?
We have to write our 5th year report.
So we've been on
We're in
6.
year 5 of
We're
the
in year
10-year
5.
cycle. We've been on warning for 5 years.
Right. Now, generally, communities get off of, that's the goal, is you get
Right,
off
you
of
get off.
warning, because warning means that they're saying to you, you really need
Fix
to do
it.
something, okay? Now, the good news here in Georgetown is we're only on warning for one standard.
And that is?
All the other important standards like curriculum, instruction, assessment, leadership, all of those standards, Georgetown did very well on the accreditation.
And the current standard is technology or
No,
building?
no. It's called-
Section 7.
it's
Community
called-
resources for
Yeah,
learning.
community
It's money.
resources for learning. It's, the ability to have a long-range plan for technology, maintenance of the building, financing for the programs. They look at the amount of students in the school and determine whether or not the programs are being funded sufficiently for the number of students. They look at the size of the facility. They look at student to staff ratios. They look at all kinds of things, but it really does center around, does the community support funding for the school at the level that meets the standards?
And if we weren't able to show improvement or at least consistency and remain on warning, what would that next step be?
Yeah, well, we probably, I kind of got the impression that she said, we would probably stay on warning until, let's say, Pembroke building is approved and built. Then they would take us off warning, because the building is a big concern for the commission.
But, excuse me, wouldn't the potential impact of losing teachers at the high school, having 2 study periods where we have none, having 29 to 32 children in an honors classroom where we already have numbers very close to that, have a very negative and almost immediate impact?
It absolutely would, if Mr. Lucia files the substantive change, it will definitely cause them to review that, and it may result. So what she said is, if it's a steady pattern and they don't determine that you're making the level of progress that they feel is important, they can downgrade your accreditation to probation. So warning is kind of between us, right? But we're still fully accredited, but we're on warning.
Right.
If you get downgraded to probation, you're still fully accredited, but you are on probation, which means you are up on their website. It's a public declaration.
It's public.
It's definitely
Right.
it's definitely a step up.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think we've read in the paper in years past when other schools have come close to that or that's happened. And you think of inner city schools, you think of Lawrence, you think of Chelsea,
Yeah.
you think of Fall River, you don't think of Georgetown, which I think you quoted as 87th in wealth. As a community. And so that's just really disappointing and disheartening, borderline pretty disgusting, that we can be that wealthy of a community yet not have a competent school system to educate our children. I think you were quoted or paraphrased the other day as saying, right now, we don't have the basics and are at bare bones. Well, if that's where we are today, then a year from now, as